The stories of domestic violence surrounding NFL stars Ray Rice, Greg Hardy, and a growing list are all but too familiar for women, sometimes even men across this country. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, 1 in every 4 women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime, and nearly 1.3 million women are victims of physical assault by a partner every year. 85% of domestic violence victims are women. Patricia Carrera and Danielle Dezal both are survivors who were brave enough to speak with me about the abuse they suffered. I want to thank you both here for joining us. And you know, as I'm sure we're going to hear in both in the conversations, it takes a lot of courage not only to get out of the situation, but courage to even share your stories about it. And I'd like to start that with a story, and if I could, Patricia, with you. Talk about how in your situation the abuse started, and as I understand it, it really started with marriage.
Yes, it was a long journey and very subtle, started very subtly. I think it's important to understand that it can happen to anyone, and that a person could be living 2 lives right in front of you. I grew up in New York City. I'm well educated. I went to a top liberal arts college. I have an MBA in finance. I had met my ex at work many, many years ago, married, came up here, and started well enough, but slowly over time became more controlling, eventually verbally abusive, and again, very, very subtle. So many signs that looking back I should have seen, but it progressed over time, and with the children coming in, I had 3 children within 5 years, it becomes that much more difficult. So when my youngest was starting kindergarten, I woke up one day and I realized that I really had nothing left of myself. I had no earning power, I had no self-esteem, I had no life of my own anymore, and I was leading 2 lives. I had the PTA life, the bake sale life, the playground life, but then after the kids went to bed, then it was a different life. So it escalated finally in an act of violence, the first act of violence. I immediately called 911. I was fortunate that by then the laws had changed, that if the officers in Westchester walk into your house and see a sign of physical violence, they arrest on the spot and they ask questions later. But
as I understand about that act of violence, literally, as I understand it, dropping your kids off at school and somebody saw you, and it took someone to have to say something for you to really recognize just how bad it had gotten here, where you were beaten and that wasn't acceptable.
Yes, I was in shock. I dropped them off. I talked to school officials, the principals and the assistants about what had happened the night before. We put plans in place for the children, and they looked at me and said, well, now you're going to head over to the shelter. You're going to go see Hope's Store. And I said, oh, no, 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 I have things to do. I was still in shock. And they said, no, 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 this is serious. You have to address this. And so by the end of the day, I did work my way over there, and they set out for me. They gave me a taste of what I had ahead of me. I had no idea. Legally, emotionally, psychologically, the children, I had no idea what I was up against.
And I want to talk about both the organization and your road back. But if we could, Danielle, your abuse started obviously at a much younger age. In fact, it happened in college, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was 19, and you know, I never learned about this in high school. I was always in healthy relationships. My parents have a healthy relationship, so I just remember thinking, like, you know, I don't need to know about that. Like, I'm too smart for it. That would never happen to me. And same thing, it happens very gradually, and that's really the scariest part. Now, in all of my speaking engagements and work for this, I say no one is ever going to hit you on the first date. You know, people are so quick to say, well, why didn't you just leave? Like, why didn't you just walk away? As if it's so simple to do. But
and what did the abuse take the form of? Was it controlling, and then it got to the physical part?
It started, you know, controlling, but it wasn't really malicious or mean right away. It was kind of just, you just said, oh my God, like, he adores me, you know, he just wanted to talk to you all the time, and it was kind of just all this attention. But then it just started taking on a new role where it was jealousy and just over possessiveness and really unhealthy, and then it did end up getting physical.
Was it easy to get out of it?
I don't know if it was easier. I mean, I think emotional abuse is just as harmful as physical, if not more, just because it's me personally, I feel like it was harder to heal from that than the physical part, just because it changes the way you think, and that's what hurt me the most. All of a sudden, I remember stepping back once it did get physical, and I said, I don't even know who I am anymore.
So what prompted you to say enough?
I kind of just had these conversations with myself because I was too ashamed to tell anyone in my life. I loved them too much I knew how much it would hurt them. I couldn't look my parents in the eye and say that. So I really just kind of knew I would have to find that right moment. I knew enough not to just leave overnight because I was scared of him, and he had made plenty of threats that if I did ever, I could never break up with him. It had to be his decision if that were to ever happen. So I was just very conscious of it. And the time did come where, after just a really bad night, I just knew this is it. And I ended it, and I made sure I told my parents right away, and I kind of created that safety net around me, just like you did with Hope Store, just so I wasn't going to go back. This was it.
And you went to officials at school, and
Yes.
they helped you as well. I'm sure there's people at home right now who aren't sure if they are, or they recognize exactly the stories you guys are telling and say, I'm in that situation too. But I just want to make sure, because they see you too, and they see two healthy, adjusted women, and they said, I can't imagine you guys ever being in a spot where you don't think that you have any value. Just how bad did it get? Just so that the people at home can really get an idea. What was the lowest moment for both of you where you said, I don't know if I can keep going with this?
For me, it was walking around a small community with a black eye. They'd seen me the day with the park, all the little kid things that we do, and then the next thing I show up at, actually was at a school play. My son's school play was like the day and a half after that, and I had this huge black eye. And people didn't know what to make of me. And so, one gentleman was joking. He said, what happened? Did you get hit with a baseball? And he had never dawned on him that this could happen in our community.
Can you pinpoint the moment where you just said,
I mean, definitely the physical situations were just, you're like, did this just happen? It's like an out-of-body experience. But also, the isolation, I think, is just something I've never felt before, just because I'm so close with my parents. And for all the parents watching right now, people constantly ask me, well, if you were so close with your mom, why didn't you tell her? Or almost kind of this blame on her, like, why didn't she know? And I respond saying, I couldn't tell them because of how close I am with them, that I was kind of just protecting everyone else, protecting everyone's relationships, and I was hurting myself the most by doing that.
People live in silence with this, whether it's the shame, whether it's, as I've talked to people, that they don't know where to go in many cases, and as you said, their lives are so interconnected there. What happens? Where do they go if they have no personal identity? You've chosen not only to do something about it, but also to share your stories, obviously, with the public and an organization that you guys both speak publicly for, Hope Store. Talk about what the group does and why you've chosen to not be silent about this and to, put yourself out front.
As a practical matter, mother of 3 young kids, Westchester County, expensive standard of living, your earning power is compromised, your self-esteem is completely shot. How exactly do you climb out from this and start over? So what Hope Store did was, when I approached them, first they set forward for me what I could expect, and they did accompany me through the court proceedings, and were able to establish a temporary order of protection in case the local one didn't stand, because the law, you may have the facts, but how things play out in court could be an entirely different matter. So logic doesn't always come into play, and you need to be prepared. They put the financial piece they set up for me. They took care of a lot of things in the court to give me that head start. So they built that very protective fence around me, so we at least had a fighting chance. It was the first time, I think, in well over a year that I could actually breathe and start to think, how should my life look, and how am I going to get there?
And Danielle, to make the decision to get out, you already said was really hard. It was difficult. But how about the decision to share your story with so many people when you kept it so hidden for so long?
I think what drove me to do that was really the aggravation that I had never learned about this before. And did so much research, and I was like, how could this be? How could the ratio be 1 in 3? It's 1 in 3 young adults, it's 1 in 3 women. How could that be true and no one ever hears about that? And I just really became obsessed with it, you know? Why didn't anyone ever teach me this? I could have known.
I'm curious, do people after you speak come up to you in the audience, young girls?
Many.
And do they tell stories that you're like, that was my life?
Yeah, and I started a club at Marist, and there were times we'd have over 100 students in this meeting on like a Monday night at 9 o'clock. Like, why are you here? But they wanted to be there, and it was great, but it was also concerning. Like, why are so many people here? And there were times I would say, you know, an anecdote or just a line out of my story, and I would see the color drain out of a girl's face, and I just knew. I was like, she's going through it.
To a mom out there who feels that she's really in a box and she's got nowhere to go, and even if she wants to leave, what does she do? What about the kids and everything else? What do you say to her, and where should she turn?
Well, your value should not be suffocated by a situation. So reach down, recognize your value, and recognize what you owe to your kids. And don't live in silence, because there is another life out there waiting for you.
We did the numbers. It's staggering how prevalent this is and the all too often tragic consequences. Again, Patricia Danielle, thank you so much for having the courage to share this and also being involved with such a terrific group.
And we come back, we will hear from a local organization committed to helping survivors regain control of their lives. And we're also speaking with lawmakers dedicated to try and change those laws on the books. We'll be right back.